people tend to watch our content live. They turn it on and they leave it on. A much higher percentage than other cable networks in general, and right up there with news and sports, which live events. A lot of it has to do with the environment. When commercials come on, people don't turn it off. It's not obtrusive, it's not offensive because of the way we structure our content and viewing. And because of that, this study, I think, really underscores the value of nonfiction content like ours, where we're telling stories about, people's homes or food or travel. And our content, it just seems to flow one show to the next show to the next show. And that's very intentional. It comes from when I was first putting HGTV together, my background in radio and understanding longer listening. And if you can get a listener, in radio and you can keep that person listening, they were much more valuable, pardon me, than just listeners who come in and out of your format. And so the original intention was to have long viewing periods on HGTV and subsequently other networks. And because of that, you're exposed to more commercial impressions. And I was overseeing the Scripps television group at the time. I was really frustrated with a lot of the programming that we had on our television stations. We never approved it and bought it, but there was a show, I remember in particular, Morton Downey Jr. It was a daytime talk show. The guy was a chain smoker, and he was loud, and he was offensive, and he would scream in people's faces. And for me, it was just these vile, how obnoxious can you get kind of talk shows. And I'd had this idea for HGTV for a long time, and I thought, there's got to be an audience out there, especially women, that would prefer something better than this. So as I started putting my presentation for HGTV together, I started figuring out my exit from Scripps, because quite frankly, I didn't think a company that historically had owned printing presses and television station towers and radio station towers would be interested in a startup company that was going to lose money for at least 3 or 4 years, which HGTV was going to do. But we still had to get the board to approve it. So when I went to the board, I actually had a newspaper, and the front section I put a label on it was CNN, and the sports section was ESPN, and the comic pages were the Cartoon Network, and then I pulled out the Home and Garden section. In those days, a lot of newspapers still had home and garden sections, and the News Sentinel did. And I told the board, I said, look, there's a segment here that potentially could be a cable network. And then I'd created some magazine racks that were full of magazines from home, food, travel, etc. And I unveiled those, and then I told them how many advertising dollars were in these magazines, that maybe we could move to video. And the board unanimously gave me $25 million and said, okay, go launch this network, kid. And then Frank and I walked out of the meeting and looked at each other and said, now what do we do? Because neither one of us had ever launched a cable network. And it just so happened, and you probably remember this, that Ross Bagwell here, who owns Citadel Productions, had been wooed by, at the time, a company, Metro Media, and they had come to Ross to buy his production company, and the deal fell through, and I heard about it. And we had to get this network launched by the end of 1994 because there was a rule passed by the FCC that said any new cable network launched in 1994, cable operators, system operators can add it and increase the cable bill. So there was like 100 new networks announced that year. And only 2 networks made it, HGTV and the History Channel. So we had to rush to get it started, and in the rush, we found this facility here, and at the time Ross was producing shows for other cable networks, and some of the shows that I thought would be good startups, if you will, for HGTV. He was producing shows for A&E Network and Discovery and TLC, and he had a home repair and remodeling show, and he had America's Castles on A&E. But more importantly, Ross was able to do what I thought was very high-quality programming on a cost-efficient basis here in Knoxville. And then additionally, it was great to be able to be in a town where I could hire employees and say, you know what, you can have a home, you can have a yard, you can live what we're going to be putting on the air. You can live the HGTV kind of lifestyle. Any entrepreneur will tell you when it's their idea, they have big dreams. Yeah. But realistically, it was survival. Yeah. It was, let's just get this thing out there, let people see it, see what it is, and hopefully they'll like it. It's like any product. Look, I remember launch morning of December 30th, 1994. We actually had a T-shirt made up with everybody's name on the back. I'm going to say 30, 35 people by the time we launched the network, and obviously that's grown to many thousand. In our case, once we launched the network, do people like it? Do people want to watch it? Because I remember before we launched, we did this big research piece because the board said, well, if we're going to give you $25 million, we'd like to have some research. And we didn't have any. So we went out and commissioned, I think it cost us $75,000 to do this big research piece. And the piece came back and said, this is the worst idea ever. And Home and Garden Television, the worst name ever. And this is going to be a dismal failure. And I remember Frank Gardner, we got the research. I said, Frank, this is awful. What are we going to do with it? He said, very simple. He turned it and dropped it in the trash can. He said, never going to see the light of day. But I think, Ed, people tend to now say, well, this was a no-brainer, right? I mean, this thing was launched. It was an immediate success. Pretty well. I remember when 9/11 happened. We gathered around on the phone that day and we said, this just does not seem right. It does not seem right that we should be showing shows about people's houses and homes and food with what's going on in this country. So we actually took our networks dark. We took the networks off the air and we put up a slide that said, I can't remember the exact wording, something to the effect, out of respect for the loss of lives in this period of mourning in the country, we don't feel is appropriate. And what was fascinating about that was, for the first 2 or 3 days, people were riveted. I'm sure you remember, I do too. But then we had this outpouring of people who said, please put your content back on because we need something good to watch. We need something positive to watch. We need to start healing.